This is part 4 chapter 4 of What If the Kamado Siblings Parted Ways. Link in description. Hope you all enjoy the fanfic What If, and if ya did then like, comment, and subscribe for more. Fanfic start. Branching Paths by Skyward Strike. Chapter 4, Clash in the Drum House. Somewhere hidden in the mountains was an old house, long abandoned by the humans that once inhabited it. That, however, was not to say that nothing lived in it. The house was home to inhumanly creatures, as one such unlucky child could attest to. Kiyoshi regretted being out playing with his siblings at night. Hadn't he done so, he wouldn't have been kidnapped by the horrible monster living in this old haunted house. Luckily, Kiyoshi had managed to escape its grasp, but he'd been wandering aimlessly in the house ever since. Until, at least, he was cornered by two other monsters. The first one was a crawling monster with a long frog-like tongue, two small horns in its head and squinted eyes. The other was a large fat-looking monster with a single horn, its chest and face dirtied in bloodstains. Both stood at opposite ends of a corridor with little room for him to escape. "I'm the one who's gonna have the rare blood, so you'd best back away here," the fat demon warned, "unless you want me to eat you up too, huh?" "No way, you tub of lard," the tongue demon cackled. "I've set my eyes on him first, there's no way you're taking this meal from me." Both monsters moved in, the fat one reaching with its hand to grab Kiyoshi while the tongue one lashed out its, tongue, much like a frog, towards him. Kiyoshi couldn't do much other than cower in fear as the two monsters fought for who would get to eat him. "This is it, I'm done for." However, a moment before either monster could reach him, the wall right beside the boy would burst apart as a figure suddenly leapt over him. Ha 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 ha. Pig assault, pig assault. The boar-headed yet bare-chested swordsman cried out as he exploded through the walls. His two serrated blades being swung simultaneously to both chop the tongue off one demon and the arm of the other. Both of them would back up, surprised, and Kiyoshi would be even more so as the odd figure who had just burst into the scene and landed over him, luckily not stepping on him as well. "Look at that, more of you ugly demons just ready for me to rip apart." "What? Another human? Where did you come from?" the tongue demon exclaimed in surprise. "It doesn't matter, I'll just have to eat him up as well," the fat demon said insistently. Both would advance at the swordsman then, uncaring for their wounds as they rushed in. The boar man meanwhile, would breathe deeply, gripping both his swords before crying out, "Breath of the beast, fifth fang. Mad cleave." He then sliced at both demons in a mad assault as Kiyoshi took cover, quickly decapitating them both. "Ha ha ha ha. Just two more pebbles for me to step on." Laughing madly, he then took off, jumping all across the hallways and soon out of Kiyoshi's sight. What was that? The boy could only as himself as he got back up, luckily unharmed. "I'm lucky I didn't end up getting cut up by that maniac. Did he even notice I was here?" He shook his head. "It doesn't matter, I have to get out of here and get back to Shoichi and Teruko." Kiyoshi knew, after all, his two younger siblings would be worried sick about him. Ever since their parents died, it had only been the three of them. Shoichi was growing up, but he wasn't ready to take care of himself and Teruko just yet. There was just no way he could leave them alone to fend for themselves. With that in mind, he would begin roaming the house's corridors once again, keeping a close eye at every corner not to run into a monster. It was useless though, and he knew it already. He only ended up wandering further around the house, passing through vaguely familiar areas at times, but never with a straight sense of direction. It was like the door he'd been dragged through by that monster didn't even exist anymore. He'd sure been lucky in sliding out of his houri when he was being dragged in and making a run for it, or else he'd be done for already. Still, he knew it was only a matter of time until he ran into another monster, or worst, that sword-wielding maniac. Still, he had to get out of there no matter what, for the sake of his siblings. So the only option was to keep looking for an exit, no matter how long it took. However, as Kiyoshi ran down another corridor, he'd see another demon turning the corner. This one smaller than the ones before, but still very much inhuman looking. You're the rare blood human the big guys have been rambling about," it said, seeming surprised, though Kiyoshi didn't understand why every monster there kept calling him a rare blood. nor what it was supposed to mean. This is my chance to grow stronger and challenge those bastards. Come here, kid. It rushed at Kiyoshi, and the boy quickly turned back in fear, running away from the monster even when it was obviously faster than him. He looked back, seeing the monster quickly gaining on him, and was unable to stop as he ran into something and fell back on the ground. He closed his eyes, ready to be devoured by the monster only to instead hear the sound of slicing and something hitting the ground dully. He kept his eyes closed for another second then before slowly opening, and seeing an older black-haired boy wearing a red haori standing over him. "Hey there, are you okay?" he asked gently, offering Kiyoshi a hand, which the boy hesitantly took, still too shocked to speak. As he was aided back to his feet, he noticed that the boy also carried a katana on his waist. Kiyoshi slowly looked back, and saw the decapitated remains of the demon that had been chasing him already fading to ash. "Did you?" He turned to look back to the older boy then, who nodded. "My name is Tanjiro Kamado. And you must be Kiyoshi." He gave the boy a small yet reassuring smile. "You don't have to worry anymore. I'm here to protect you." Somewhere else not too far away, the strongest and oldest resident in the manor known as the Drum House roamed its halls. Kyogai was a large demon, retaining some of his features from his time as a human like his long black hair, yet now he had graying skin and red eyes empty of sclerae. Not to mention the several drums protruding from his stomach, shoulders, hips, front chest and back. Currently, Kyogai felt frustrated with himself. It was all because of a stupid mistake and a sloppy decision. He had finally managed to find a rare-blooded human for him to consume after so many years, and even dragged the boy back into his house. Somehow though, just as he'd entered, the boy slipped out of the haori the demon had been dragging him by and ran off. He thought of killing the boy to prevent him from running away, but it would have made a mess, not too much of a mess. He couldn't let even a finger go to waste when it came to rare bloods, not anymore. What he had not immediately accounted for though were the other pesky demons in the house. Kyogai was the strongest, of course, but that didn't mean they held any respect for him. Parasites were all they were, having entered his home to take shelter from the deadly sun and remained there eating on his leftovers. It irritated the old demon, but there wasn't much he could do other than crushing those weaker fools and casting them out of his house into the sunlight whenever they crossed his path. It was those two in special he had to worry about. The one with the tongue and the fat one. They had grown strong enough to actually fight back somewhat, and it irritated him deeply. It was the same weakness that had cast him out of the demon moons in the first place. The demon moons were the 12 strongest demons, handpicked by the Great One himself, the progenitor of all demons. Even being part of the lower moons was an immense honor for any demon, and Kyogai had once been one himself. All demons have a limited capacity for how far they can grow. How many humans they can consume before they can no longer get stronger. He remembered the Great One's words vividly even at this moment. "I think you will go far, Kyogai. That is why I am granting you the title of Lower Moon 6. But it had changed. He had reached that upper limit, and no matter how many more humans he ate, his strength had simply stopped growing. And thus he had his lower moon rank been stripped of him. But it wasn't without hope. Humans with rare blood existed, and eating a human with rare blood was like eating at least 50 normal ones. He had tasted a human with rare blood a long time ago, before even becoming a lower moon. He remembered the sudden surge in power he'd received. It was amazing, second only to the blood of the Great One himself. He knew that if he managed to find that boy, he would be able to finally become stronger and regain his rightful position as a demon moon. "I must find him," he mumbled to himself as he walked. "Rare blood. I need his rare blood. Where is the boy?" Kyogai would continue making his way down the corridor when he suddenly paused, suddenly hearing something. It was still somewhat far off, but he could definitely hear it. Footsteps were heading this way, running footsteps. Ha ha ha. He'd then hear the laughing, coming through. "I can feel another one of you bastards close by." Out of the darkness, the boar man would emerge, dashing head on towards Kyogai, his two blades already at the ready to slice down the demon ahead of him. "Another one of you. How dare you enter my house without permission?" The demon said angrily, raising his trembling hand before bringing it down to slam his palm onto his right leg's drum. Immediately, gravity seemed to shift to the wall in front of him, which meant Inosuke would suddenly be running up a 90-degree angle, leading to him quickly losing momentum and beginning to fall back down. What the hell is this? You meddling human, Kyogai grunted out, raising his voice now that he was attacked by this uninvited guest. This whole house is my territory. He then beat the drum on his back, causing both him and the boar swordsman to be suddenly teleported into a much larger room in the house with a higher ceiling. The boar meanwhile would kick himself off the floor and land with a backflip on the wall facing Kyogai, laughing manically again. So interesting. Very interesting, he declared, so you can spin the room around. Around and around. The boar-headed swordsman then pointed his blade up towards the demon. Doesn't matter though. Just like the others, you're gonna end up slain by the great Lord Inosuke. Irritating, Kyogai mumbled, so irritating. He then hit the drum in his midsection, and Inosuke would have to move as an invisible force tore apart the wall like the claws of a beast running through it. With another slap of his right shoulder drum, the room would move clockwise, landing Inosuke in his right wall, where the boar-headed swordsman would rush in while cackling and jump towards the demon to try and decapitate it again. Tricks like that aren't gonna stop me from cutting your head off, he declared, swinging his blade, only for gravity to be switched again to the front as Kyogai struck his right leg drum, causing Inosuke to miss his swing, start falling back again, followed then by the left shoulder drum, leading to the gravity of the room falling then to the left wall, with Inosuke crashing down somewhat roughly. That's a cheap trick, he declared angrily, even as he dodged the invisible attack created by Kyogai's midsection drum. Fight me properly, you coward. Inosuke tried rushing the demon again, but just as he prepared to jump in and attack, another drum slap would force him to dodge Kyogai's claw attack, and before he could dash in again, a slap to the left leg would switch over the gravity of the room to the wall behind the demon, leading to the boar swordsman to start falling once again. Not this crap again, he exclaimed annoyedly as he fell. No more. No more. Take this. Inosuke spun around and tossed one of his swords at the demon's back as he fell down. It hit its target, piercing Kyogai's back drum, its tip emerging through his chest, causing the demon to stumble forward, his blood dripping along the edge of the blade and down to the ground. You hurt me. You destroyed my drum, he said in shock. Ha ha ha, serves you right, Inosuke declared, kicking off the ground and to the ceiling, back and forth, starting to wall jump his way back up towards Kyogai. Unforgivable. Unforgivable, the demon grunted out, blank eyes suddenly widening. How dare you, you damn human. He angrily struck another drum to flip the gravity to the ceiling then, before switching over to his midsection drum, Inosuke landed, barely able to readjust from his wall jump to narrowly dodge Kyogai's invisible attack, ripping apart the ground he'd stood on. This time 4 claw marks emerging where it was previously only 3. Close. Too close, the boar exclaimed, dodging and preparing to jump off to Kyogai once again, only for him to lose his balance as gravity went back to normal and he began falling to the ground. Inosuke did manage to switch his balance to land properly, and immediately dashed towards the demon. Another slap to his midsection would cause the claws to tear at Inosuke, though he narrowly dodged again, this time by jumping over both the attack and Kyogai himself. He would grab a hold of the katana he'd stabbed through the demon and yank it out while swinging his other sword to try and decapitate Kyogai, and while succeeding at the former, would be unable to follow up with the latter as a palm was slammed onto the midsection the same way as it would with one of those drums, sending him sprawling across the room and away from the demon. Though now with his 2 katana at hand, Inosuke though would rise again quickly, laughing joyfully. You're good. Real good. But I'm not gonna back down till I take that head of yours, he promised, getting into a stance with his 2 blades. Annoying, Kyogai mumbled angrily, the wound around his chest closing as he raised a trembling hand to chest level. Such an annoyance. Breath of the beast, 8th fang, Inosuke called out, before rushing towards the demon at full speed, his 2 blades at the ready to cut down his target just as Kyogai brought down his hand to slam on his midsection, invisible claws cutting through the ground to meet the boar's dash. Pig assault. The boar-headed swordsman swung his blades against the invisible attack, cutting through the ground at full power, the two forces clashing head-on. There was an explosion felt throughout the drum house as Inosuke was thrown back by the blast, still holding tightly onto his damaged but intact blades. Seeing this, Kyogai would then take the opportunity to switch the gravity in the room again so that rather than being thrown back, Inosuke would be falling down towards the wall-turned ground. Grunting at the damage he'd received from the clash, the swordsman would struggle to spin around and get in a proper landing, and though he managed to do so, it was right where the wall had been previously damaged by one of Kyogai's slashes. Upon landing on the already brittle wall, ground would give away beneath him as he ended up crashing right through said wall and kept falling further and further, soon disappearing out of the demon's sight entirely. Kyogai only narrowed his eyes, grunting in annoyance. He'd been unable to kill the intruder, but at least he'd banished him from his house. This weakness was despicable. Had he been stronger, this would have never been a problem. That pest would have never even managed to cut his drum, which was specially an annoyance given how long those took to regenerate in comparison to his normal wounds. It didn't matter though. None of this did. He'd gotten sidetracked by the intruder, but he still had to find the rare-blooded child. Once he did, he would be strong enough, and intruders like that one would never be a problem again. "I've been looking for you," a voice said from behind him, and Kyogai would realize he'd relaxed too early as, once he turned to look over his shoulder, yet another human waited for him. Having just walked into the room through the open door behind him, the newcomer was different from the first one. Rather than animalistic and wild, this one wore a white and gray kimono under a red haori, his red eyes seemingly sizing up the demon before him from underneath his long black hair. With a pair of Hanafuda-looking earrings hanging from his earlobes, "You're the last demon left, but you also have the strongest smell. I'll take a guess and say you're the house owner, aren't you?" Kyogai grit his teeth, turning around fully to face the newly arrived human. "Another one of you pests," he grunted out with his increased frustration. "You keep entering my house without permission. Such an annoyance. Must I rip you apart to finally get things my way?" "Yeah," he said nonchalantly, resting a hand over the katana sheathed on his waist as he took a step towards Kyogai. "Let's see you try." Barely could he finish saying that before the demon hit the drum in his midsection, and invisible claws tore up the ground before the human, only for him to casually sidestep the attack with perfect timing, dodging all four of the claws without even getting his haori ripped by it. His resting hand took a proper hold of his katana's hilt then, and the swordsman would move in at his target. Kyogai widened his eyes at the speed at which his opponent moved, easily faster than the boar had been. He would barely have time to slap one of his drums twice and switch up the gravity to the ceiling as the human reached him, drawing his blade already aiming for the neck, only for his feet to suddenly leave the ground, causing him to miss his attack entirely. Kyogai would take advantage of his surprise to grab a hold of his ankle with one hand and use another hand to slap one of his drums and reverse gravity again, aiming to slam the human back down on the ground full force and rip him apart with his claws before he could get up. Except when he brought down his arm to slam him down, he'd feel a sting of pain at his wrist, and the swordsman would backflip away from him, using the momentum of his swing to land a safe distance away alongside Kyogai's maimed hand. "So that's your demon blood art then," he noted, rising back to his feet with his white-bladed katana in hand. "You can switch around gravity in this room and attack with that invisible slashing technique. You seem big, but given that flimsy grip at yours, you're not that strong physically, meaning your attack range is very limited, not for someone who's supposed to be the strongest demon around. You're still quite a disappointment, you know." Though he should be impressed by how quickly the human had figured out his technique from just that brief exchange, Kyogai was instead overcome with anger. "How dare you?" he grunted out, his teeth gritting and his body shaking in pure anger. He was weak, he knew that, but he wouldn't take that from this absolute nothing of a human. Fast as he might be, Kyogai was still leagues above this trash, and he felt like showing him just how much. "I don't care anymore. The rare blood can wait. I'll rip you to shreds myself," he told the boy, as he placed a trembling hand over his own face, his right eye rolling down from the back of his head to reveal the crossed-out kanji for the number 6 in his right eye. It'll be my first step in returning to the 12 demon moons. This didn't have the expected effect on the human though. Rather than him trembling in fear and asking for mercy, his eyes only widened for a moment in surprise before then narrowing. So. You are, or rather were, Lower Moon 6, huh? I see. He then opened up a small, yet very pleased smirk. This is perfect. Exactly what I've been looking for. You're the ideal messenger for my cause. Though still angry, Kyogai was now confused too. He hoped to intimidate the human by revealing his pedigree as a former demon moon, and yet that only seemed to encourage him. Was he that over his head? Did he think he could just take down a powerful demon and make a name for himself? Your arrogance is irritating, petulant boy. Not arrogance, certainty. He corrected the demon, raising his blade with a two-handed grip into a readied stance. You said this was your first step back into the demon moons, right? Well, you're wrong. This is my first step. And it's one I've been waiting way too long to take. He then took a deep breath, and as he did so Kyogai could have sworn he felt the room grow slightly hotter. Now, watch closely. This will only take a minute. The boy would grip his hilt tightly then, letting out a warm exhale, flames seeming to spew in his breath as the white blade in his hand glistened for a moment, before suddenly being enveloped in a bright fire that had Kyogai squinting his eyes. A sword of flames. He thought, the power behind the technique palpable even with the distance between them, and as the swordsman stared him down intensely, the drum demon would feel his entire body suddenly freeze up. For a moment, the boy before him was replaced with the shadowed figure of a fully grown man wearing a similar attire to him while wielding a dark blade enveloped in the same bright flames and donning the same Hanafuda earrings. Kyogai didn't fully understand who the man or the boy before him were, but every cell in his body was telling him that should he step up to the swordsman before him, his life would be cut short in a second. Breath of the sun, the boy and man seemed to say in unison for a moment, before the former's voice took over again. First dance, waltz. Kyogai's eyes widened, anger being replaced by fear. He knew one thing above all others, he had to keep this human away from him. The demon slapped one of his drums twice with his regrown hand just as the demon slayer rushed him. The room was flipped upside down again, preventing him from slashing the drum demon and causing him to suddenly begin falling to the ceiling. Though he used his initial momentum to roll and recover when Kyogai tried slashing at him with his midsection drum, the swordsman leapt to the left wall, and used it to jump higher towards the demon from the floor-turned ceiling. Kyogai slapped his right shoulder drum to switch the ground around again and prevent him from following. Except the swordsman used the momentum of the switching room to land on the wall-turned ceiling and propel himself after Kyogai as he stood horizontally on a wall. He slapped the drum in his left leg and the gravity switched to the back wall, causing the flaming sword slash to miss. This didn't seem to much bother the swordsman though as he landed on the wall before continuing to chase the drum demon. He's following no matter what. Kyogai thought nervously as he was forced to switch around the room to narrowly dodge another flaming slash. I've got no choice, I have to use my trump card. The demon would then begin striking his drums with redoubled speed, causing the room to start spinning around wildly, preventing the swordsman to get proper footing and move after him. Rapid drumming. The demon slayer used the little ground time he now had wisely, recovering from his impacts against it and minimizing any fall damage he'd get from the sudden shifts in gravity tossing him around. He also had to dodge the slashing attacks thrown at him from the drum demon, 5 invisible claws now marring the ground at every attempt. And yet, in spite of his situation, his eyes remained fixed on the drum demon, waiting patiently for the opening he'd need to cut his foe down. Seeing this, Kyogai decided he needed to end the human before he got the chance he was waiting for, and switched gravity from his front wall to the ceiling, sending his opponent sprawling across the ceiling-turned floor and into one of the walls, before finalizing his drum solo by striking his midsection drum with both hands simultaneously. 10 invisible claws blindsiding the demon slayer from both sides, and crashing together in the corner of the room, ripping apart the wall and raising a cloud of dust. Kyogai's eyes narrowed, trying to see through the destruction left by his attack to confirm the swordsman's death, only for the dust cloud to be dispersed by a sudden burst of speed. The young man with the flaming sword rocketing from the ceiling all the way up the floor. The drum demon tried slapping another one of his drums to try and switch around the room again, but was too slow. And his vision would be obscured by the katana's flame before its hot blade bit into his neck and separated it from the rest of his body. Gravity returned to normal, the swordsman flipping around to land on his feet while Kyogai's head just hit the ground dully with shock on its face. Soon followed by his body as it stood for another moment before balance left it to collapse as well. He defeated me, Kyogai realized in shock, watching as the swordsman before him raised and sheathed away his katana, the fire along its edge dispersing as it slid back into the scabbard. Damn it. This is not how it's all supposed to go. I was supposed to grow stronger, and stronger. I was going to become a demon moon once again. I was finally going to matter. The demon slayer then turned to look into the slain demon, narrowing his eyes as he watched Kyogai disintegrate for a moment before speaking. I don't know if you'll be listening to this, but I'll say it anyway. He declared to the former lower moon, much to his confusion, this is just the beginning. A preface to my actual mission. Soon enough I'll start going after the actual demon moons, hunt them down one by one. You've underestimated and abused humanity for far too long, and I'll make each and every one of you pay for it. And then, once all of them are dead, it'll be your turn, and I'll finally finish what he started. Count your days, Muzan Kibutsuji. I am coming. Kyogai could only widen his eyes at hearing that. This human was not speaking to him, he was speaking through him. And issuing a challenge to the Great One himself nonetheless. It was suicide, what he had just done. Even if he'd been caught off guard by that flaming sword of his, Kyogai couldn't even measure up to the higher-ranked lower moons, let alone the upper moons, who themselves paled in comparison to Muzan. And yet, that vision of the older swordsman with his flaming sword told him there was something about this boy, something deserving of a demon's fear just as much as the progenitor himself. The drum demon however could only narrow his eyes slightly as he watched silently the crimson-clad human walk off and out the room, his remaining body quickly turning into ash and soon fading away. Somewhere far away, a glass of wine would fall and shatter against the ground, spilling its contents all over the carpeted floor. A woman would look up from her book, having been sitting by the fireplace enjoying some reading, over to her husband, who currently stood facing a bookshelf with his back to her. The shattered glass of wine by his feet, the hand he'd been holding it shaking slightly. Tsukihiko, dear. Is everything all right? She inquired. The man clenched his hand into a fist to stop his trembling and took a deep breath. Yes, everything's fine, honey. I just feel dazed is all. He reassured her, I think I'll go get some fresh air at the balcony. She looked at her husband worriedly then, are you sure? You know how sensitive to the sun your skin is, I wouldn't like you getting hurt. It'll be all right, Ray. He told his wife then, it's very cloudy outside, so it shouldn't be much of an issue. Ray seemed hesitant, but nodded still, all right then, but please take care. I will. He'd tell her before turning away and beginning to walk over to the balcony as Ray returned to her book. Had he turned over to her, she would have seen the widened red eyes holding a mix of surprise and hatred that her husband currently donned. Muzan Kibutsuji deeply despised his pretend wife and adopted child, but of all his dozens of covers, Tsukihiko's was probably the one he disliked taking the least. If only for the fact that here he could maintain his natural form rather than having to pose as a woman or child. It had been easy enough to get rid of Ray's previous fiancé and take his place posing as a successful traveling merchant with a rare skin disease that prevented him from being under direct sunlight. It was an annoyance, no doubt about it, but it was a needed precaution that had allowed him to remain completely out of the Demon Slayer Corp's radar for almost 200 years now. And prevent the incident with the swordsman with the Hanafuda earrings repeating itself. Indeed, it had been a long time since he'd even felt threatened in any significant way by one of the demon slayers, but that had just been broken only seconds ago. Being the progenitor of all demons, Muzan had a direct mental link with every single one of his species. In special those recently turned or the stronger demon moons were especially clear to read. Any time one of his demons died though, he was made known through their link. He even was made aware of their last moments before death, though more often than not these demons were too insignificant for him to even care. Kyogai would be the same were it not for the way in which he died. Kyogai had been a blunder of his admittedly. He thought that, with his spatial manipulation techniques, the fool might have been able to eventually develop his demon blood art into something similar to Nakime, which allowed her to freely control the entirety of a pocket dimension. He'd even granted the demon some of his blood and a rank at the bottom of the lower moons. Unfortunately, Kyogai proved another disappointment, his potential maxed out in just a couple years. So he had stripped him off his rank and left him to his house in the middle of nowhere in the off chance that he would be able to kill at least a few pesky demon slayers should they come across him. Pathetic as he might also be, the one filling his rank right now proved to have far more potential than he ever did. Muzan himself never thought he'd bother with ever thinking about the drum demon again. But his death had proved him wrong. As his last memories made it clear, Kyogai had been murdered by a demon slayer, one wielding a bright flaming sword and wearing Hanafuda earrings. Just like those of the swordsman that had gotten so close to ending him 400 years ago. And not only that, but the measly human had the nerve to address him directly. "Count your days, Muzan Kibutsuji. I am coming." He was livid, hearing those words. He had to hold himself back from killing his wife to blow off steam. How dare that insignificant pest threaten him? The thought alone that a human could stand up to him made him disgusted. And yet, he'd once been overconfident as well, and it had very nearly cost him his life at the hands of the first Hanafuda earring swordsman. This one seemed much younger, so it would be only natural to pluck him out before he ever had the chance to grow stronger and challenge his power. Reaching the balcony, Muzan would snap his fingers, and before him two figures would appear, already bowing at his feet as they well should. "We live to serve you, master," the male demon declared. "What is it you desire?" Muzan looked over them to the sprawling city ahead. "One of my former demon moons was just killed by a young demon slayer with crimson robes and Hanafuda earrings. He told them, track him down and bring me his head." "Your wish is our command," the female added, before both of them disappeared again as if they had never been there to begin with, leaving their master alone in the balcony staring off into the city. Inosuke Hashibira woke up with a start, breathing heavily from underneath his boar head. He quickly realized he was sitting right outside the house full of demons he'd entered earlier. The last thing he remembered was fighting that weird bongo demon, and then the ground collapsed and he fell. And then there was sunlight for a brief moment. Before he hit his head hard as he fell on the ground and got knocked out for a bit. Grabbing both his katana beside him, he jumped up to his feet. "Damn it. That bastard managed to kick me out of the house." He raised his swords wildly to the air. "I'm gonna get back in there and kick his ass." He then stopped, and stared off into the side, where he noticed two kids some distance away from him, hugging each other, staring at him fearfully. "What?" Inosuke called out to them, pointing his blade at the two, which in no way made them any less scared. "You wanna fight too?" "And no. Please don't eat us, Mr. Monster," the boy said, hugging the little girl beside him tighter as she sobbed slightly. Boring," was all Inosuke said before he turned to go back into the house, only to notice something emerging from the front door. Another boy, this one a bit older and wearing a green kimono, being accompanied by a guy looking about the same age as Inosuke himself, with black hair and some weird earrings. Wearing a red haori with long over some kimono. What really caught the boar's attention though was the sword strapped to his waist. "Big brother Kiyoshi." The two kids then rushed past the boar-headed swordsman, met by the boy in the green kimono, who quickly pulled the two into an emotional hug. "We thought that monster had gotten you." The sister sobbed as she hugged him. "We're so happy you're safe." "Don't worry, guys. Tanjiro here saved me. He even killed the big monster with the drums that took me," Kiyoshi told the two. "Thank you for saving our brother, mister," the boy told him. Tanjiro smiled at the kids. "Don't worry, it's part of the job." Hearing all that though, Inosuke blinked in surprise. He'd killed the demon, that guy. "Hey, you," he called out, getting both his and the kids' attention. "So you killed that drum demon then?" "That was my opponent, ya bastard." Tanjiro turned towards him. "Well, you didn't really do that great a job at it though, did you?" Inosuke stared at him for a moment in silence. "How dare you?" he cried out intensely, pointing his sword at Tanjiro angrily. "Who the hell do you even think you are, huh?" The crimson-clad swordsman narrowed his eyes, walking past the now tense children. "My name is Tanjiro Kamado. And I'm not one to stand around waiting for someone else when it comes to slaying demons." "Huh, I see then," the boar-headed boy passionately proclaimed. "Well, I am Inosuke Hashibira, and I'm not someone who lets others fight in my place either, Manjiro Yamada." "That's not even close to right," Tanjiro pointed out blankly. "If I can't fight the demon, there's only one thing I can do," Inosuke declared while ignoring his words, dashing in towards his fellow swordsman. "I'll have to fight you instead." Tanjiro widened his eyes, and quickly untied his katana from his waist, raising it still in its scabbard to block his attacker's swords, the children crying out in panic at this development. "Stop this. Demon slayers aren't supposed to fight one another." "I don't give a crap about that," the beast-like swordsman replied, further pressing his opponent with his sword swings, though he was quick to block and evade them. Quickly moving away from the children and having Inosuke follow him, "I live by my own rules first, and if there's someone strong to fight, I gotta take him on." Tanjiro continued blocking the serrated blades with his own sheathed katana, laying on the defensive while Inosuke attacked him further. An opportunity soon showed itself when the dual-wielding swordsman swung both his serrated blades horizontally, allowing him to leap between them, spinning his body mid-air to give him the needed momentum to swing his scabbard at Inosuke's right foot and knock him off his balance. That wasn't enough to stop him, however, as he stabbed not one of his blades into the ground to prevent himself from falling and thrust his katana at Tanjiro, who barely deflected the stab over his shoulder with a swing of his own. Laughing, Inosuke continued on the attack, wildly swinging his two katana and pressing his opponent further back. Tanjiro, on the other hand, would block and dodge a slew of slashes coming his way, all the while observing his opponent closely. It wasn't until Inosuke brought down one of his blades that he chose to act again, sidestepping the attack and thrusting his sheathed blade into his opponent's open midsection to send him skidding a few feet back. "That's enough," he told the boar-headed swordsman. "Your fighting style resembles that of a wild animal. You really put that boar head to justice, don't you? But now that I've gotten a proper read on it, I know you won't be able to beat me. If we go on any longer, I can't guarantee I'll be able to stop this fight without hurting you." "Big talk coming from someone who won't even draw his sword," Inosuke replied, dashing at him again, bringing down his right blade upon Tanjiro, only for the red-clad boy to swiftly deflect it, guiding his blade to the side, before quickly switching it around so his own scabbard was beneath its edge and powerfully striking the katana upward in a move that disarmed the bore of his blade. He tried to follow up with a horizontal swing at his side, but it was narrowly dodged as the now single-bladed Inosuke slashed relentlessly at him. He'd only get another couple swings though before Tanjiro used the momentum of one of his blocks to let the blade spin over his right arm and be taken by his left hand, leaving him in perfect position to take hold of his hilt and draw the katana, hitting Inosuke in the chin with the upward motion to knock off the boar head high into the air and throw him back. The now unmasked swordsman landed back first, and grunted, struggling to rise up, only to have a white blade of Nichiren pointed at his chest. "Now surrender." Seeing Inosuke unmasked for the first time caught Tanjiro off guard. From his opponent's demeanor, it was easy for someone to imagine the man behind the boar might be quite the brutish type. For Inosuke though it was much the opposite. Despite his mad grin, his shoulder-length hair, green eyes and pretty features made him look somewhat unmanly. "You don't look like much, but you really are something else, Gonpachiro Kamaboko," he exclaimed, laughing without even giving Tanjiro a chance to correct him. After all, this had been the toughest fight Inosuke had since that one Breath of the Wind user. "From today onwards, I declare that you'll be my fated rival. We'll call this mighty clash a tie for today, but next time I'll beat your ass down to oblivion." Sure thing," the red-clad boy said as he lowered his blade, unsure of exactly how to reply. Is something disturbing you?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. It's just, I didn't really expect you to be so effeminate," Tanjiro awkwardly admitted. There was a moment of silence then. The hell did you just say? Inosuke moved in ready to dice up his newly declared rival to bits, only to be stopped midway when the hilt of a katana struck his temple with great force. He would fall down to the ground, quickly losing consciousness again, though before he did he would faintly hear one more thing just as everything went to black. Maybe I shouldn't have said that last thing. After that not much else would happen. Tanjiro would talk to the kids a bit, a white crow landing on his shoulder and spitting out a small sack of wisteria to the oldest boy after a brief explanation of what a rare blood was. After that he would just bid them farewell and begin walking off again, leaving them and the unconscious boar man behind. Before he did though, he would stop, seemingly stopping to sniff something. He would look off into the trees for a moment before narrowing his eyes, turning away and walking off. Somewhere closely though, hidden from all sight behind a tree though, a blond boy in a yellow houri collapsed by the side of the tree, panting nervously, "Did he see me? Man, I hope not." The boy thought, allowing himself a sigh of relief, "Those guys are monsters. I was 100% right in not getting inside that scary place and letting those two handle it. 200% even. Hell, one of them even had a white talking crow. That's way too crazy." He stopped and looked down then, narrowing his eyes somewhat morosely. "Those are the real demon slayers, not a weakling like me. I don't even know how I managed to pass the final selection. If it were up to me that kid would have ended up eaten for sure." He sighed, looking up at the sky from between the treetops before muttering to himself, "You're a disappointment, Zenitsu." End Part 4. Hope you all enjoyed the fanfic. What if, and if ya did, then like, comment, and subscribe for more.